Hello, friends. If you're curious about the movie Radio Flyer, 1992, you're in the perfect place. Don't forget to give this video a quick like, it really helps us out. And if you're new here, hit subscribe to stay updated on all the latest movie deep dives. Let's jump right in. It begins not with magic, but with memory. The kind of memory that comes in soft, dusty hues, shaped more by feeling than by fact. It starts with the voice of a grown man, reflecting not on a single day or a great achievement, but on a summer. A summer of flight, of pain, of escape. The voice doesn't rush. It unfolds like an old photograph being pulled from a drawer, creased, a little faded, but vivid in the way only childhood recollections can be. You don't know exactly where it's going, but you can already feel that it's going to take you somewhere you've never quite been before. This is the kind of story that wraps itself in innocence just long enough to catch you off guard. It seems like a tale about boys and bicycles, treehouses and baseball cards. But underneath, there's something else. Something deeper. A crack beneath the surface. A bruise covered by a bandage of wonder. And the beauty of it, what makes it last, is how it never lets you settle into one emotion for too long. One moment you're laughing at the wild imaginations of two brothers. The next, you're holding your breath. Because reality, like pain, has a way of creeping into even the most carefully guarded daydream. It follows two boys, brothers, close in age and spirit. The older one is quiet, thoughtful, the kind who notices things even when he doesn't understand them. The younger is bright, wide-eyed, holding fast to every scrap of imagination like it's a lifeline. Together, they move with the kind of energy only children can possess, their adventures unbound by logic, driven entirely by wonder and desperation. They explore junkyards as if they're pirate treasure coves. They rebuild a red wagon as if it were a spaceship. And they believe, truly, that with enough speed, enough power, and enough heart, that wagon can fly. Their world is painted in mid-century tones, suburbs that sprawl with the promise of new beginnings, backyard fences that hide secrets as much as they create boundaries. Their mother is strong, trying to smile through the fatigue, dragging them across states to escape a past she won't name. And then there's him, the man she marries. At first, he seems like another shot at stability, a chance at a fresh start. But shadows gather around him quickly. He is never called by name. Only the king. And he rules their world with fists behind closed doors and silence sharp enough to cut. What unfolds is a delicate balancing act between fantasy and survival. The older brother, our narrator, carries the weight of witnessing. He sees the bruises. Hears the sobs through thin walls. Watches his younger sibling invent reasons to stay outside longer, to avoid going home. But in that same breath, they chase the impossible. They collect scraps and blueprints. They build with the determination of two boys who believe in something that no one else would dare to imagine. A flying wagon. To an adult, it's nonsense. A child's wishful thinking. But to them, it's a plan. A promise. A way out. And the more the world closes in around them, the more vital the dream becomes. Every piece they add, every tweak to the design, every bolt tightened with shaking hands, it all carries the weight of freedom. They aren't just building an escape. They're building hope. The beauty of it lies in how the film blurs the lines. Is the flight real? Or is it something greater than reality? An act of belief so pure that it becomes truth in its own right? The film doesn't answer that question in black and white. Instead, it invites you to remember how the world once looked through your own younger eyes. Before things made sense. Before rules were hard and stories had to end a certain way. It asks, if a child believes hard enough, can imagination save them? There are quiet, unforgettable moments tucked in between the big ones. The older brother reading instructions out loud as they construct their machine. The younger one sketching designs by flashlight, his fingers smudged with graphite and hope. The mother, oblivious and desperate, working double shifts, always just missing the signs. And the king, whose presence grows heavier with every scene, even when he isn't there. You feel him in the silence. In the way the boys' eyes flick toward the hallway. In the way they laugh too loud, as if trying to push the darkness away. The film is rich with visual metaphors. The red wagon, once a symbol of childhood, now transformed into a vessel of freedom. The hill behind their house, so steep it becomes mythic. The drawings the younger boy hides under his bed, each one more elaborate than the last, each one a blueprint for survival. These aren't just props or set dressing. They're pieces of the boy's inner world, physical manifestations of what they can't yet say out loud. And then there's the narration. It doesn't intrude. It guides. It speaks from a place of distance, but not detachment. It's the voice of someone who has carried a story for decades, turning it over again and again, still trying to make sense of it, still wondering what parts were real and what parts were necessary to believe in order to survive. That narration becomes our anchor, our way of understanding that what we're watching isn't just a tale of two kids. It's a memory, filtered through time and healing. When the climax arrives, it doesn't roar. It rises. Slowly. Unshakably. The boys finally complete their creation, a strange, beautiful contraption patched together from steel and wood, faith and love. They drag it up the hill under cover of night, their faces lit by determination. And when it takes flight, when wheels leave the ground and the stars seem just within reach, you're not sure what's real anymore. And that's the point. Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe what matters is that they believed. And that one of them got away. In the aftermath, the questions remain. The narrator never confirms what happened. Did he truly see his brother fly away? Or did he need to believe that he did? Was it escape or elegy? Was it triumph or goodbye? And in that ambiguity lies the film's deepest truth. Some wounds don't close neatly. Some stories aren't about answers. They're about the power of belief when everything else has failed. It leaves you sitting in silence, thinking not just about what you saw, but about what it meant. About the ways we build myths to survive. About the things we bury in memory. About the people we carry, long after they've gone. Because in the end, this isn't just a story about flight. It's a story about freedom. About imagination as resistance. About the desperate, beautiful lengths we go to in order to protect what matters most. And it dares to ask the one question most stories never do. What if you believed hard enough that you could actually fly? Wouldn't you at least try? Even if no one else believed you. Even if they called it impossible. Especially then. It begins like a memory already softened by time. A man, older now, driving a car at dusk. His son is asleep in the passenger seat, the glow of streetlights brushing over his face. The father's voice comes softly, like someone recalling a dream they're not quite sure ever happened. He speaks not about himself, but about a summer when he was a boy. A summer that changed everything. The car fades. The past opens. And we are taken back to the beginning, not of a story, but of a feeling. The town they move to is quiet, modest, sunlit in that golden way only childhood towns seem to be. It sits on the edge of something invisible. Not danger. Not yet. But a certain unease that hides in the corners of the screen. There's something off in the stillness. Something that doesn't have a name but can be felt in the way the wind moves through the grass, or how the neighbors look a second too long before closing their doors. Two brothers arrive with their mother and a promise of a new life. Mike is the older one, serious, observant, already used to being the one who keeps things together. Bobby is younger, wide-eyed, and full of wonder, the kind of child who turns everything into a game, a mystery, a mission. Their mother is doing her best, carrying the exhaustion of too many restarts on her face, but still smiling when she can. They settle into a house that creaks when the wind blows, with a backyard big enough to dream in. For a moment, It seems like things might actually be okay. They meet new kids, explore dirt paths, race through backyards. They find a dog, a mutt full of loyalty and scars, and name him Shane. They begin piecing together a world where they can just be kids. Their new stepfather, the one they call the King, seems at first like he might fit into this fragile piece. He works on cars, wears sunglasses inside the house, and barely speaks more than a few words at a time. But he smiles. He brings home a shiny new red wagon. He calls them boys like he's known them forever. But the silence starts early. The first time Bobby flinches when the King walks into the room. The way he grows quiet when asked how he got a bruise. The way he stares at the floor when he eats. Mike sees it before anyone else. Or maybe he just admits it to himself first. Something is wrong. But how do you say that out loud when you're a child? When you've already been dragged across states, promised again and again that this time it will be different. They build things. That's how they cope. That's how they speak when the words are too hard to find. In the garage, they begin transforming the red wagon into something else. Something bigger. Stronger. They add a bicycle seat. A steering column. Extra wheels. It becomes their project, their secret, their salvation. Bobby, in particular, throws himself into it completely. Drawing blueprints on napkins. Digging through junkyards for spare parts. Talking about physics and wingspan like he's building something NASA might envy. And Mike doesn't argue. He helps. He doesn't believe in the flight, not really. But he believes in Bobby. And he knows instinctively that whatever Bobby's building, it isn't just about flying. It's about leaving. About getting away from something they can't yet name. The King's presence begins to grow like a shadow. We never see the worst of him. The camera is careful. It doesn't show violence. But it shows aftermath. Bobby's silence. The way his eyes dart when footsteps approach. The muffled shouts behind closed doors. The bruises that appear without explanation. The strange, childlike defenses Bobby creates, saying he fell or that it was Shane's fault. Mike tries to tell their mother once. But she's tired. She's already sacrificed so much. And maybe she doesn't want to see it. Not yet. So the boys keep building. They make friends with other kids in the neighborhood. Maniac, who swears he once outran a train. Fisher, who believes in aliens, and Norman, the unofficial leader, who claims he can build anything. Together, they become a kind of gang. Not the dangerous kind, but the sacred kind. The kind that rides together at sunset and builds forts in the woods. The kind that swears loyalty not with oaths, but with shared silence. There's a warmth to these scenes, a kind of aching nostalgia that makes you forget, for a moment, that there's a storm building. The boys laugh. They get into trouble. They race their bikes until their legs ache. And all the while, the wagon evolves. Grows wings. Grows possibilities. Then something changes. Bobby starts talking about leaving. Really leaving. Not just flying the wagon down a hill. But taking off. Going somewhere safe. Somewhere the King can't follow. He says it casually, the way kids say things. Like he doesn't know how heartbreaking it is to hear him plan his own escape like it's a game. Mike tries to laugh it off. But deep down, he knows Bobby means it. He's building something not to explore, but to survive. And that realization shifts everything. Mike begins to help more seriously. They begin testing flight principles. Studying wind resistance. Trying to calculate how fast a wagon would need to go to lift off. They look for ramps. Talk about weight distribution. Measure wingspan using broomsticks and coat hangers. It's absurd. It's beautiful. It's desperate. One afternoon, while their mother is at work and the King is out, they take the wagon to the top of a hill. Just to test. Just to see. Bobby straps in. Mike holds the rear handle. There's a long pause. Then a push. The wagon races down the hill, faster than it should. The wheels rattle. The wings catch air. And for a heartbeat, just a breath, there's flight. Not real flight. Not sustained. But something close enough that Bobby believes again, harder than before. And Mike, watching his brother's face light up with that impossible hope, realizes something terrifying. This isn't pretend anymore. Bobby is going to fly. He doesn't just want to escape. He needs to. And now, Mike must decide if he's going to help him, or try to stop him. Because there's a truth underneath it all that he hasn't wanted to say out loud. Not even to himself. He's afraid Bobby is building wings because no one else has given him a way out. And if they don't finish this wagon, if they don't find a way to make it fly, something even more unthinkable might happen. So they keep building. And the sun keeps setting. And the silence in the house keeps growing louder. The days begin to shorten, and the air takes on that late summer stillness, a kind of hush that settles in just before everything changes. In the golden evenings, the sun seems to hang lower, the light touching everything like a secret. For Mike, every hour feels heavier now. Every tick of the clock, every clank of a wrench in the garage, every glance Bobby gives him when no one else is looking, it all feels like the countdown has begun. They're almost finished with it. The wagon doesn't look like a toy anymore. It looks like something built with sacred desperation, with the belief of a boy who refuses to accept the world as it is. The wings stretch out from the sides, rigid and patched, beautiful in their crookedness. There are coils now, wiring, a motor they've stitched together from parts that don't belong together, but somehow hum like they've found their purpose. Every part of the machine whispers the same thing. Flight. Escape. Freedom. And Bobby, somehow, looks lighter. Not in body, but in spirit. Like someone who's seen the path through the darkness and is finally walking toward it. He doesn't talk about the king much anymore. Doesn't talk about the bruises, or the fear, or the strange silence that still hangs in the house whenever their mother's gone. He just talks about angles. Trajectories. Altitude. Like a boy preparing for a mission no one else is supposed to understand. Mike watches all of it with a heart that feels like it's being pulled in two directions. One part wants to believe. Wants to stand beside his brother at the top of the hill and push with all his strength, let him sail into the sky. But the other part, the older part, the part that knows how the world really works, feels like he's losing something. Like he's watching Bobby drift away, piece by piece, and there's nothing he can do to stop it. And then, one night, it happens again. The shouting. The sound of breaking glass. The heavy footsteps. The silence afterward, so deep and long it feels like the air itself has vanished. Mike doesn't see what happens. But he sees Bobby the next morning. And that's enough. The bruises are deeper now. The light in his eyes, dimmer. He doesn't say anything. He doesn't have to. They both know it's time. The plan becomes clear. Not said out loud, not written down. Just understood between two brothers who have run out of other options. They'll finish the wagon. They'll take it to the top of the hill. And Bobby will fly. Really fly. Not pretend. Not play. Not dream. Just fly, away from the house, from the pain, from the shadow of the king. Their mother doesn't notice the change in them. Not fully. She's too tired, too overwhelmed. She's working double shifts now, hoping to keep the house, to keep the peace. She kisses them both goodbye one morning and doesn't see the way Bobby winces when she hugs him too tightly. She doesn't hear the way Mike doesn't speak for the rest of the day. And the king, he's there, but not. A storm cloud on the edge of the frame, always just out of sight. His presence is the kind that makes walls seem thinner, footsteps louder. His absence feels just as dangerous as his arrival. He is the unspoken countdown in every scene. So the boys make their final preparations. They test the ramp, wooden planks nailed into the hillside, slick with oil to reduce friction. They reinforce the frame with extra bolts. Bobby adds a helmet, painted red with a lightning bolt, and calls it his astronaut gear. Mike packs a bag with tools, snacks, a flashlight, just in case. Just in case the flight doesn't go as planned. Just in case he needs to go after him. Just in case. But he knows he won't. Because deep down, he knows this flight isn't about seeing what happens. It's about leaving. The night before the flight, they sleep in the garage. Or try to. Bobby curls up beside the wagon like a soldier beside his weapon. Mike lies awake, listening to the wind, trying to memorize the sound of his brother breathing. He wonders what it will be like tomorrow. If Bobby will wave from the sky. If he'll land in a field on the other side of town. If he'll disappear completely. If he'll survive. But there are no answers. Only silence. Morning comes slow and pale. The world feels suspended, like the breath before a scream. They wait until their mother leaves for work. Until the king is passed out in front of the TV, a bottle half empty beside him. Then they wheel the wagon out into the light. It squeaks and groans, but it moves. It's ready. The other boys are already at the hill. Maniac, Fisher, Norman. They came because they believe. Or maybe because they love Bobby too much not to come. There's a strange reverence in the air, like they're attending something holy. They don't ask questions. They just stand back and watch. Mike helps Bobby into the wagon. He straps him in. Checks the wires. Adjusts the wings. Tries to speak, but nothing comes out. Bobby reaches up, touches his brother's arm, and just says, "Thanks." It's not enough. It's everything. The sky above them is clear. The ramp stretches down the hill, steep and wild, lined with old tires and chalk markings. The wind picks up slightly, just enough to make the grass ripple. Mike places his hands on the back of the wagon. Pushes. It starts slow. Then faster. The wheels rattle. The wings tremble. Bobby leans forward, gripping the controls. The motor sputters, then roars. And then, at the bottom of the hill, at the edge of everything, they hit the ramp. For a second, just a second, the wagon lifts. Not much. A few feet. Maybe less. But the wind catches. The wings hold. And in that breathless moment, time stops. Bobby is airborne. The kids on the hill cheer, scream, chase after him. Mike stands frozen, eyes wide, not daring to believe what he's seeing. The wagon glides, dips, rises again, then disappears behind the trees. Gone. They search the woods for hours. No wreckage, no splinters, no sign of the wagon, no sign of Bobby. The police are called. So are the neighbors. Dogs are brought in. Searchlights sweep the trees. Everyone talks in hushed tones. The king stands with his arms crossed, saying nothing. The mother cries, but it's a silent cry, the kind that doesn't come from loss so much as confusion. A hole where understanding should be. But Mike doesn't cry. Because he saw it. He saw Bobby fly. Days pass. Then weeks. No sign. No clues. The town slowly moves on. The official story becomes murky. An accident. A tragedy. A missing child who wandered too far. But Mike knows better. He remembers the sound of the wind. The look on Bobby's face. The way the wheels left the earth. And in the years that follow, he carries that memory like a secret map. He grows up. Moves on. But never forgets. And when he's old enough, when he has a child of his own, he tells the story, not as a warning, not as a fairy tale, but as a truth. His truth. That belief can lift you. That imagination, when forged in pain and built with love, can become a vehicle more powerful than anything else in the world. And that sometimes, when the world becomes too heavy, the only way out is up. So he tells the story, softly, as they drive beneath the stars. A story about two boys. About a red wagon. About flight. And somewhere, high above the clouds, a boy still flies. Because sometimes, belief is enough to carry you home. Mike stands at the edge of his childhood like someone trying to remember the sound of their own voice. He is the lens through which the entire story is filtered, not just as a narrator, but as a vessel of memory. The way he tells it, you can feel the weight of time on every word. You hear it in his voice, not worn by bitterness, but softened by the ache of recollection. His presence is quiet, but constant. And as a character, Mike is defined less by what he says and more by what he holds inside. He is the older brother, the observer, the protector, but not the kind that always succeeds. As a child, Mike exists in the impossible space between knowing and powerlessness. He sees what others won't. He understands things long before he has the language to name them. He watches Bobby shrink into silence, flinch at movement, and pretend with a kind of urgency that only survivors know. And yet, Mike can't stop it. That helplessness is etched into his every choice, every breath. He builds the wagon with Bobby not because he believes in flight, but because he believes in him. Because if he can't fix what's broken, maybe he can help him escape it. His love is quiet, devoted, tragic. Because loving someone you can't save changes you. Mike becomes the memory keeper, the one who carries the story after it ends. And when we hear his voice again, older and wiser, we understand what that role has cost him. He's built a life. He has a son now. But a part of him will always be standing at the bottom of that hill, watching the red wagon disappear into the sky, wondering if he did the right thing. If letting go was bravery, or betrayal. That ambiguity is what makes him so painfully real. Bobby, on the other hand, is sunlight wrapped in sadness. From the first moment we meet him, it's clear he is the heart of this story. Not just because he's charming or sweet, but because he carries a purity of belief that the world is actively trying to extinguish. He's younger, smaller, but somehow he's the one with the bigger vision. He sees flight in a wagon, escape in junkyard scraps, hope in every bolt, every drawing, every late-night blueprint sketched under flashlight. He's not just imaginative. He's desperate. Because fantasy, for Bobby, isn't a luxury. It's survival. When the world around him becomes unbearable, when his body carries bruises no one will name, he turns inward, builds outward. Constructs a future where gravity isn't a sentence, where hurt can't follow you into the sky. The wagon is never just a toy. It's his answer to the question no child should ever have to ask. How do I leave without saying goodbye? Bobby's character is drawn with heartbreaking subtlety. He never complains, never accuses. His trauma reveals itself in fragments. In the way he avoids eye contact, in how he overcompensates with joy, in the way he speaks about flying like someone who's already halfway gone. And that quiet resilience, that gentle insistence on building his escape with love and laughter, makes his pain all the more devastating. He is, in every way, a symbol of lost innocence, of childhood fractured, of imagination as resistance. And yet, he's also deeply human. He teases Mike. He pets Shane like he's the most loyal creature on earth. He grins when his hair sticks out under his helmet. He cries, not in front of others, but alone, shoulders shaking, breath caught in his throat. His suffering isn't performative. It's internal. And that's what makes his hope feel so powerful. It's a choice, a refusal, a fight. Their mother is a figure carved out of fatigue and longing. She loves her sons, there's no question. but she's been stretched thin by the grind of trying to hold together a life that never stops slipping through her fingers. She moves through the story like someone balancing plates on a wire, always one step from collapse. Her smiles are forced. Her voice is often rushed. Her eyes carry 1,000 apologies she never speaks aloud. She tries. That's her defining trait. She tries to make this new town work. She tries to believe the king will be different. She tries to protect her boys without having to see what they're shielding themselves from. And that failure, not from malice, but from exhaustion, is what makes her such a complex, tragic figure. She is every parent who missed the signs. Every mother who believed the new beginning might finally stick. Every woman who wanted to be strong enough, even when the cracks began to show. She's not an absent parent. But she's not a present one, either. She exists in the emotional periphery of her sons' lives, missing just enough to make a difference. And when Bobby vanishes, when the search begins and the questions come, you see it all collapse inside her. She's not just grieving a son. She's grieving 100 chances to see him, to ask, to stop it. The king, never named, never softened, is the film's silent antagonist. He is not shown in violent outbursts. He is not given monologues or motives. He is a presence, a force. He exists in the way Bobby recoils when a door slams, in how Mike glances toward the hallway before speaking, in the shadow that creeps into the corners of the house when he enters a room. He is all the more terrifying because of what we don't see. Because the film refuses to sensationalize his abuse, it forces us to confront its reality in a different way. Through aftermath. Through avoidance. Through the fear that wraps itself around every scene he touches. He is not a man. He is a weight. A sentence the boys carry, silently, every day. And that silence is what makes him real. Because so often, abuse is not loud. It is hidden. It is quiet. It is unspoken because to speak it is to risk everything. And by leaving the king unnamed, the story acknowledges that sometimes the worst monsters are the ones that live in the rooms we're taught not to talk about. But even outside this core family, the characters orbiting them add texture. Maniac, the fast-talking kid with a story for everything, becomes a symbol of what childhood should be: chaotic, fearless, free. Fisher and Norman, with their conspiracies and courage, add levity, but also serve as reflections of the world the boys could have had. A world without bruises, without fear, where imagination is just play, not necessity. Shane, the scrappy mutt with a lopsided tail and a loyalty too big for his body, is more than just a dog. He's the one constant, the one creature that senses everything before anyone else. He follows Bobby everywhere, like a silent guardian. And when Bobby disappears, Shane waits at the hill for days, tail still wagging, like he's guarding a gate only he believes his boy will return through. Even the adult Mike, who bookends the story with that worn, reflective narration, is a character of deep resonance. He's the echo of the boy who let go. He's the proof that life moved forward, that time healed some wounds but not all. And his decision to tell the story, to speak it out loud for the first time, to share it with his son, is an act of release, of acknowledgement, of giving weight to a memory too long carried alone. It's in his voice that we find closure, not because every question is answered, but because someone remembers, because someone still believes. These characters aren't just people. They're archetypes made flesh. The witness, the dreamer, the survivor, the protector. And what binds them together is not the pain they endure, but the love that persists in spite of it, in spite of silence, in spite of fear, in spite of the fact that one of them may be gone. Because love, in this story, is what builds the wagon. It's what tightens the bolts. It's what pushes the wheels. It's what keeps the memory alive after everything else has faded. And in the end, that's what matters most. Not who flew, not how high, but that someone believed enough to try. Sometimes, a film comes into the world not like a polished machine but like a whispered secret. And the one we're exploring now is a secret that somehow slipped through the cracks of the early 90s blockbuster world. It didn't come with bombast or towering expectations. It came with a red wagon, a childhood dream, and a story that balanced precariously between fantasy and unspeakable truth. But what happened behind the scenes, what shaped it, what nearly broke it, what made it utterly unlike anything else, deserves its own kind of story. Because the journey of making this film was almost as surreal as the story it told. It started long before cameras rolled, when a young screenwriter sat down to pen a story loosely inspired by a childhood wound. The original script was not written as a fantasy at all. It was raw, harsh, a grim exploration of trauma, seen through a child's unfiltered eyes. The red wagon was present, but there were no wings, no takeoff, no illusion. Just escape, or the absence of it. But something about the tone haunted everyone who read it. They knew it needed something else. Not less pain, but more hope. Not avoidance, but alchemy. The first director attached to the project was a then unknown up-and-comer who would later become one of the most influential filmmakers of his generation. He was drawn to the quiet poetry of the story, the way it wrapped darkness inside innocence. But he didn't stay long. The producers grew nervous about the tone. There were arguments about whether the abuse should be explicit or implied. The young director walked. What followed was a carousel of rewrites and reshuffling. For a while, the film sat in limbo. Then, unexpectedly, a different voice stepped in, one known for producing big-budget blockbusters, but with a deep affection for stories about children and dreams. He saw something others didn't. Not just tragedy, but transformation. He came on board, and suddenly, the film had wind in its sails again. One of the earliest casting decisions was also one of the strangest. The adult narrator, an older version of Mike, was originally voiced by another actor entirely. He recorded all the lines. His voice was woven into early cuts. But something didn't sit right. Test audiences felt emotionally disconnected. The voice felt too polished, too distant. So late in the process, almost on a whim, the team replaced him with another actor. Not a superstar, but someone who could speak like memory itself, worn, warm, wistful. They never credited the first actor. His voice simply vanished from the final cut. The child actors, on the other hand, brought something impossible to the screen: honesty. The boy who played Bobby had never experienced a role with such emotional depth before. To help him access the difficult material, the director encouraged him to write journal entries in character. At first, they were silly. Then they grew darker. And one entry, found weeks later in his dressing room, read simply, "I want to fly because down here hurts too much." It was never shown to the public. Another fascinating twist came with the dog, Shane. The production used not one, but 3 different dogs to portray him. One for close-ups, one for running, one for stunts. But the dog used in the emotional farewell scene at the hilltop was different. He wasn't trained for film. He was a rescue brought in at the last second when one of the others fell ill. No one expected him to sit still, let alone connect emotionally with the young actor. But during filming, as Bobby stepped into the wagon for the final time, the dog padded over and placed his head on the boy's lap, completely unprompted. The cameras caught it. The crew cried. That take made the final cut. What's even stranger? That dog was adopted by the director after filming ended. Named Shane, for real. The wagon itself, so iconic, so simple, went through more redesigns than most Hollywood costumes. It had to be light enough for a child to push but sturdy enough to carry the mechanical rig for certain scenes. There were 8 versions of it in total. One could fly, in short bursts, using a wire rig suspended from cranes and guided by remote-controlled stabilizers. Another was modified to actually roll down steep hills, with hidden brakes. And one, just one, was hollowed out and fitted with a tiny camera system, giving the audience the point of view of a boy flying away. Only 3 of those wagons survive today. One is in a private collection. One disappeared during transport. And one sits in a warehouse, collecting dust, the wings still attached. Another little-known fact: the crew battled relentless weather. The location chosen for the hill scenes was notoriously unpredictable. On the day they filmed the final flight, wind speeds hit record highs. Gusts knocked over lights, tents, even part of the dolly track. The shoot was almost cancelled. But they pushed forward. That wind, the one that lifts Bobby into the sky, wasn't special effects. It was real. Nature itself conspired to give that moment the weight it needed. Perhaps the most mysterious anecdote happened during a night shoot in the woods. The boys and their friends were filming a scene where they search for scraps under moonlight. The crew had set up a soundstage near the edge of a forest, and as they rolled camera, strange feedback began to interrupt the audio feed. It wasn't static. It was voices. Layered whispers. Nonsense phrases. Not picked up by the boom mic, but embedded in the wireless signal itself. They stopped shooting. Checked the frequencies. No explanation. The sound engineer still keeps a recording of that night. He plays it for new hires as a warning. Or maybe a story. The film score is another hidden gem. Composed under a tight deadline and with a modest budget, it ended up being one of the most emotionally resonant parts of the experience. The composer chose to use toy instruments, tiny pianos, wind-up music boxes, glockenspiels, blended with full orchestral swells. This contrast created a sonic landscape that mirrored the film's tone, innocence colliding with gravity. One piece, titled Flight, was recorded in a single take, with the composer in tears by the final note. That track, unknown to many, has since been used in grief counseling workshops. Test audiences split down the middle. Half believed Bobby really flew. Half believed he died. The studio panicked. They asked for a new ending, something more explicit. But the filmmakers refused. They believed the ambiguity was the point. That faith, in the face of pain, had to be unprovable. That belief itself was the answer. So they left it. As a result, critics were divided. Some called it emotionally manipulative. Others called it a masterpiece of quiet storytelling. But audiences? They kept coming. Kept watching. Kept debating. And over the years, what was once seen as too strange, too risky, too uncertain, became a cult classic. A whispered favorite. A film passed down not like a blockbuster, but like a secret between hearts. Years later, one of the original crew members admitted something strange. That during filming, they buried a time capsule at the top of the hill. Inside it, a script page. A Polaroid of the boys laughing. A toy compass. A feather. And a note that read, "For whoever still believes." No one knows if it's still there. But part of you hopes it is. Because some stories aren't meant to be told in a straight line. Some are meant to be discovered, piece by piece, in the corners of memory. In the whispers of film sets. In the shadows of scenes that almost didn't happen. This film, strange and small and deeply felt, didn't need spectacle. It had wings. It had silence. It had belief. And sometimes, that's all a story needs to fly. It's easy, perhaps too easy, to dismiss the story at first glance. A red wagon that takes flight. 2 boys lost in the haze of suburban Americana. A narrative threaded through memory and wonder. You could assume, if you only skimmed the surface, that this was just a child's tale. Sweet, nostalgic, safe. But the truth lies deeper. And for those who watched closely, those who felt the breath catch in their lungs during the quietest moments, this story offered something far more dangerous. It asked us to sit inside grief. It dared us to hold both pain and magic in the same trembling hand. Critics didn't know where to place it. Some looked at the soft visuals, the warm narration, the swelling score, and assumed it was meant for children. Others recognized the rawness beneath the sheen, abuse hinted at but never sensationalized, a child's fear encoded in metaphors, and an ending so ambiguous it ached. But across all perspectives, one thing was clear. The film was unlike anything else of its time. And it wouldn't be easily forgotten. From a critical standpoint, one of the most compelling aspects is the opening structure itself. The framing device, an adult Mike narrating the events of his childhood, does more than guide the plot. It immediately signals that memory, not chronology, is what we're about to enter. The narration doesn't clarify. It blurs. It casts everything in a golden light, the kind that softens edges and casts long shadows. Critics noted how this structure invites us to question what we're seeing. Is this a literal retelling? A selective memory? A fairy tale built from trauma? And that, in itself, became a powerful theme, the unreliability of memory as both a burden and a defense mechanism. The events inside the film unfold through this lens. Take, for instance, the repeated use of visual distance. Scenes that should be confrontational, moments where we know the king has hurt Bobby, are never shown directly. Instead, we see the aftermath. Bobby's bruises. His silence. The way he winces when a door creaks open. Some critics saw this as a narrative weakness, an evasion. But others understood the deeper purpose. The film is told from a child's perspective. And children, especially those enduring trauma, often cannot process or even fully witness the violence done to them. So the film doesn't flinch. It looks away. Not to protect us, but to remain faithful to how a child might survive. This technique, showing everything through implication rather than exposition, was praised by some as a masterclass in restraint. By refusing to exploit the trauma for drama, the story allows it to settle deeper, become more insidious. And in doing so, it forces the audience to carry it too. To feel it in the silences, in the spaces between. The red wagon, of course, is central to every interpretation. On the surface, it's a symbol of childhood, of play, adventure, freedom. But under critical analysis, it becomes much more. It's resistance. It's fantasy weaponized against fear. Critics have long debated whether the wagon actually flies. Some say yes, that the moment of liftoff is the film embracing its magical realism fully, offering Bobby the escape he needs. Others argue it's metaphor, that Bobby's flight is death, and the ambiguity is Mike's way of coping with an unbearable truth. But here's where the film's genius lies. It never decides for you. It leaves the door cracked open. It trusts the audience to sit with uncertainty. And that, from a critical standpoint, is a rare and powerful thing. Other pivotal moments drew equally divided responses. The scene where Bobby first suggests flying away is spoken with such childlike certainty that it almost feels absurd. And yet, it lands with a weight that critics couldn't ignore. His desire isn't rooted in delusion. It's rooted in necessity. He isn't pretending, he's planning. That line between play and strategy is where the film does its most delicate balancing act. And critics noted how it captured something profoundly real. The way abused children often turn to fantasy not to escape reality, but to rewrite it. One review described the film as a parable for the powerless. Another called it a lullaby for the broken. The ambiguity of the final scene, Bobby's flight, became one of the most talked-about endings in early 1990s cinema. Some critics praised it for its courage, its refusal to confirm or deny, its emotional gut punch. Others found it too elusive, even manipulative. But few denied its impact. It stuck with viewers. It lingered. That image of a boy sailing into the sky in a patched-together wagon haunted people, not because it was fantastical, but because it might have been the only mercy left to him. From a thematic lens, several threads emerge with clarity and force. Chief among them, The transformative power of belief. Not belief as escapism, but belief as a kind of rebellion. Bobby believes in flight, not because it's childish, but because it's the only way forward. That belief drives him to create, to fight, to imagine a world where hurt can't follow him. And in a society where pain is often muted or ignored, especially in children, that belief becomes radical. Closely tied to this is the theme of brotherhood. Mike's journey is one of witnessing. He sees what's happening to Bobby. He knows. And yet, he's as powerless as any child might be. His role as narrator is steeped in guilt, not just survivor's guilt, but the guilt of having watched and not been able to stop it. Critics have pointed out that Mike is not a hero. He doesn't save Bobby, but he remembers him, carries him, tells his story, and in a way, that act becomes its own kind of redemption. Another recurring theme is silence. The silence of adults. The silence inside the house. The silence in the moments that matter most. The mother, in particular, is a figure of complexity. Some critics lambasted her for not seeing the signs. Others defended her as a product of her time, her desperation, her own blind hope. What's clear is that the film does not judge her. It simply shows her. A woman trying to survive, trying to love, failing in ways that cost everything. And then there's the king, never named, never directly confronted. He exists as a figure of dread, a shape in the periphery. His absence from direct conflict is one of the film's most controversial choices. Some critics argued that it softened the reality of abuse. Others insisted it deepened it, made it more accurate, more terrifying. Because in real life, these figures often go unpunished. They are hidden, protected, denied, and their shadows live on long after their footsteps fade. The decision not to show the abuse directly mirrors the real-world silence that so often surrounds it. It's not denial. It's exposure through implication. Perhaps the most lasting critical debate centered around the film's genre blending. Was it fantasy? Drama? Psychological coming-of-age? Audiences expecting a straightforward family film were shaken by its darker undertones. Those seeking realism were thrown by the magical elements. But those willing to live in the in-between found something rare, a film that didn't flatten trauma into melodrama or inflate fantasy into unreality. It let both exist together, interwoven, interdependent. Because for children like Bobby and Mike and countless others, the line between dream and defense is always thin. Over time, critical consensus shifted. Initially misunderstood, the film found its champions in quieter corners. Writers who had lived through abuse, therapists who used it in grief sessions, educators who saw it as a tool for empathy. Slowly, its reputation grew. Not loud, not fast, but steadily, like a memory that refuses to fade. And that, in the end, might be the most resonant thing about it. This wasn't a film designed to entertain. It was a film designed to hold something. A truth too heavy for most stories. A grief too quiet for headlines. A hope so fragile it had to be wrapped in the illusion of flight. And it worked. Because people remember. Not the dialogue. Not the structure. But the feeling. Of standing on that hill. Of hearing wheels lift off the ground. Of watching someone you love vanish into the sky. Believing, with everything in you, that maybe they made it. Maybe they really flew. Maybe belief was enough. Some stories are born out of a whisper, an idea scribbled in a journal or a quiet conversation late at night. Others erupt into existence with all the noise of studio bidding wars and red carpets. But this one came from somewhere more delicate, more uncertain. It was born from something fragile. A memory that didn't quite want to be told, at least not directly. And from the very beginning, making this film was never just about capturing a story. It was about preserving a feeling. Something aching, something tender, something flickering in the space between fantasy and fear. It all started with a single line. "I had a brother once, and he could fly." That was the seed. That one line floated through early drafts of the script, handwritten in the margins, sometimes crossed out, sometimes circled. The screenwriter, David Mickey Evans, didn't know at first what kind of story it would become. Only that it would be personal. That it would hold more truth than it might be comfortable to say out loud. He called it a fable, but only because calling it a confession might have scared people away. Once the script was finished, studios circled quickly. There was a hunger in Hollywood at the time for coming-of-age stories, especially ones soaked in nostalgia. But this wasn't Stand By Me. It wasn't about the thrill of discovery or the innocence of childhood. It was about the places childhood couldn't protect you. About imagination as survival. That made it both irresistible and dangerous. The production itself was set in motion with care and controversy. Originally, the writer himself was set to direct. But as pre-production began, pressure from the studio mounted. The budget had grown. Expectations had shifted. And soon, Evans was quietly replaced. In his place came Richard Donner, the legendary director behind Superman, The Goonies, Lethal Weapon, a man known for balancing adventure with heart and for coaxing remarkable performances from young actors. It was a pivot that changed the tone of the film but preserved its soul. Donner approached the material like a balancing act. He saw the magic. He understood the trauma. But more than anything, he knew the film had to feel real to work. Not in the literal sense, but in the emotional one. So every decision, from casting to lighting to the music that whispered beneath the dialogue, was made with one question in mind: does this feel like a memory? And memory, as everyone on set soon discovered, is a strange thing to film. To achieve the hazy, golden light that defined the movie's visual tone, cinematographer Laszlo Kovacs worked closely with Donner to craft a look that felt like something between a dream and a photograph left in the sun. They used diffusion filters, soft backlighting, and natural shadows to evoke a sense of time slipping by, slow and painful. Some days, they'd wait for hours just to catch the perfect slant of sunlight through a window. And if it didn't come, they'd scrap the shot and try again tomorrow. The town that served as the backdrop wasn't built from scratch, it was found. A small, unassuming neighborhood outside Los Angeles became the canvas. The production design team spent weeks aging houses, dressing yards with period-accurate props, and removing anything too modern. They planted weeds, painted over satellite dishes, even added rust to mailboxes. Every detail was engineered to make it feel like a place where time had folded in on itself. A place that could have existed in 1969 or 1992, or maybe just in someone's memory. But perhaps the most complicated part of production wasn't the sets or the effects. It was the casting. Finding the right boys to play Mike and Bobby was everything. They auditioned dozens of child actors. Some were too polished, some too timid. But when they saw Elijah Wood and Joseph Mazzello together, something clicked. Elijah brought a gravity that belied his age, eyes that seemed to have seen too much. And Joseph had that wide-eyed purity, that spark of imagination you couldn't teach. The two bonded almost immediately. They built forts between takes, played pranks on the crew, whispered secrets like real brothers. That bond translated directly onto the screen. Donner, known for working well with children, gave them space to improvise. He'd sometimes roll the camera before calling action, capturing those in-between moments, a sigh, a glance, a shift in posture, that made their relationship feel lived in. And in the more emotional scenes, he was patient. He never forced a performance. He waited until it was ready to come on its own. One particularly challenging scene, the final one, at the Hill, took over a week to film. The logistics were brutal. The ramp had to be stable. The sky had to be just right. The special effects had to be believable, but subtle. And most of all, The emotion had to land. Elijah stood behind the wagon over and over, hands trembling, trying to get the goodbye just right. Joseph, strapped into the wagon with his little helmet on, looked up at him each time like it really was the last. The crew often found themselves holding their breath, not because they were waiting for the perfect take, but because the moment felt real. It was during this sequence that one of the most unplanned moments in the film occurred. On the final day of shooting, as Bobby's wagon crested the hill for the very last time, a gust of wind hit the set. Strong, sudden, and completely unscheduled. It caught the wings of the prop wagon, lifting them just enough to mimic real flight. No wires. No cranes. Just the wind. The take was perfect. The crew erupted. Some swore it was fate. Others called it eerie. Donner just nodded and said, "That's the shot." The wagon itself became a legend on set. There were 6 versions, each with a different function. One for close-ups, one rigged for the ramp, one designed for green screen, and a specially modified one with reinforced axles for safety. But none were perfect. They rattled. They stalled. One famously lost a wheel halfway down a test ramp, careening into a bush while Joseph screamed, not out of fear, but laughter. The footage exists, somewhere, in a vault. It was later used as blooper reel gold. There were lighter moments, too. The cast and crew would gather at sunset each day just to sit on the hill and watch the light fade. It became a ritual. Sometimes they'd talk. Sometimes not. It was a moment of quiet in a production filled with emotional weight. On Fridays, a local ice cream truck was hired to park near set, giving the kids and the adults something sweet to end the week. One day, Joseph bought 10 popsicles and handed them out to everyone, saying, "Even sad movies need good days." Music played a huge role in shaping the film's emotional current. Composer Hans Zimmer, still early in his rise at the time, delivered a score that wrapped the film in tenderness and ache. He used minimal piano lines, layered strings, and delicate percussive textures to match the rhythm of memory. There's a moment in the score, just as Bobby's wagon lifts off the ramp, where a single note holds longer than the others. It's not just music. It's time standing still. Zimmer later said that note was a question, not an answer. The narration was recorded last. After the entire film had been edited, the voice of adult Mike was layered in, one piece at a time. The actor, Tom Hanks, uncredited, read the lines in a dimly lit studio, alone, over 2 nights. He didn't act them. He remembered them. That was Donner's direction. Don't perform. Just think of someone you miss. And when the final line came, he just flew away. There was silence in the recording booth. No one wanted to say, "Cut." Despite all this care, all this craft, the film was not met with universal acclaim upon release. Audiences were unsure how to categorize it. Critics were divided. Some praised its beauty, its heart. Others called it manipulative, even irresponsible. The ambiguity of the ending rattled people. The suggestion of abuse, though never explicit, was enough to unsettle. The magic, for some, felt like a betrayal. But for others, it felt like truth. A truth that couldn't be told any other way. Over the years, the perception shifted. The film found its home not in box office numbers, but in living rooms. In whispered recommendations. In the hands of people who needed to see it. Therapists began using it in trauma workshops. Writers cited it as a story that gave them permission to tell their own. And children, those who once watched it without fully understanding, grew into adults who never forgot how it made them feel. And for the people who made it, the experience never really left them. Elijah kept one of the wagon's bolts in a box at home. Joseph kept the helmet. Donner, before he passed, said it was one of the most important films of his career, not because it was the biggest, but because it was the most honest. And somewhere, tucked away in a forgotten shed behind a prop house in Burbank, one of those red wagons still sits. Dusty. Silent. Wings folded. Waiting. Just in case someone needs to believe again. Because that was the whole point, wasn't it? To build something out of pain. To let it fly. To remind us that even the heaviest stories can take to the sky, if we build them right. It begins with a stretch of road that seems to disappear into memory itself. Quiet, sun-drenched, framed by the faded gold of tall grass and the occasional rusted fence. There's nothing extraordinary about this road. It doesn't scream for attention. But the moment it appears, it places you somewhere unmistakable, not in a specific town or year, but in a state of feeling. A familiar ache that belongs to childhood, the kind where everything seems just a little too bright or a little too far away. And it's here, in this sun-bleached threshold between the present and the past, that the story unfolds. The settings chosen for the film aren't grand or ostentatious. They're not cinematic in the usual sense, not designed to dazzle or distract. Instead, they carry a different kind of power. One born of subtlety. These are places you don't just see, but remember. Even if you've never been there. Even if they're fictional. Because the film doesn't rely on geography. It relies on emotional truth. The kind of settings that speak not to maps, but to moments. The house where Mike and Bobby live is central to everything. A single-story, modest little home on the edge of a neighborhood that looks like it was built from longing. Its lawn is patchy. Its fence is leaning. The screen door never quite closes right. But it breathes like a real place. Lived in. Slightly worn. Familiar in a way that creeps under your skin. You get the sense that this isn't the first place they've lived, and it won't be the last. It's a stop along the way. A refuge built from hope, even if that hope doesn't hold. Inside, the house tells its own story. The kitchen is narrow, the walls a muted yellow that might once have been cheerful. There are toys tucked into corners, drawings taped to the fridge, a flickering light above the sink. The camera doesn't linger on these details with any particular emphasis. It simply absorbs them, lets them exist in the background, like the quiet hum of a life trying to pretend it's okay. And that pretense, of normalcy, of comfort, is contrasted by the shadows that cling to certain spaces. The hallway, for instance. A narrow stretch of wood flooring that leads to bedrooms, always filmed slightly darker than the rest of the house. That hallway becomes a liminal space. A place of tension. A place where footsteps echo just a second too long. It's where the king's presence seems most potent. Not because we see him there, but because we don't. It's the silence, the held breath, the way Bobby's body changes when he walks down it. That hallway becomes a character of its own. The garage is the film's counterweight. It's where the boys build the wagon. Where scraps become salvation. Where childhood imagination is forged into something resembling escape. The garage, unlike the house, is open. Lit by daylight streaming through gaps in the walls. Cluttered with tools and boxes, but filled with possibility. It's a space of agency, not oppression. And the cinematography reflects this. Wide shots. Natural light. Steady frames that give the characters room to breathe. It's a place of creation. Of transformation. The hill behind the house is perhaps the most symbolic setting of all. Not just because it becomes the launching point for Bobby's flight, but because it stands like a monument at the edge of their world. It appears early in the film, quietly. The boys pass it on their bikes, stare at it, talk about it, but they don't approach it. Not yet. The hill is steep, covered in dry grass and flanked by trees that seem to lean in slightly, like guardians or witnesses. As the story progresses, the hill becomes mythic, not in scale, but in meaning. It is the final boundary between fear and freedom. Cinematically, the hill is always filmed with reverence. The angles are wide but low, making it appear larger than it is. The sun is often setting behind it, casting long shadows, wrapping the slope in a halo of orange and gold. It's rarely filmed from the top until the end. And when it is, the world looks different. Distant. Beautiful. A place worth flying away from. Or toward. The neighborhood itself, dusty roads, cracked sidewalks, open lots, is a silent backdrop to the boys' everyday adventures. It's where they meet their friends, where they race their bikes, where they find scraps for their flying machine. But even here, the cinematography never glorifies. There are no sweeping crane shots or oversaturated colors. The camera stays close, grounded, observant. It watches from the side, like a neighbor peeking through a window, too curious to look away but too cautious to intervene. The junkyard is another key setting. A place of decay, yes, but also a place of treasure. This is where the boys dig for parts, climbing over rusted car frames, cracked engines, and broken dreams. The lighting is harsher here. The shadows deeper. The cinematography takes on a slightly grainier tone. It feels less safe, less certain, but also full of possibility. Because in these forgotten corners, the boys find what they need. Not just physically, but emotionally. They take the discarded and make it into something sacred. One of the most intimate locations in the film is the boys' shared bedroom. Small, cluttered, half-lit by a single bedside lamp. Posters on the wall. A radio playing softly in the background. It's in this room that the deepest moments of connection unfold. Where Mike whispers encouragement. Where Bobby confesses fears. Where drawings are made, folded, hidden under mattresses. The lighting here is always warm. The shots steady. The space feels safe, at least more so than any other. But it's what the camera chooses not to show that often says the most. There are scenes where violence is implied but never seen. The hallway grows darker. A door slams. The sound drops out. The camera stays in the kitchen or outside as if it, too, is afraid to look. This choice, a deliberate avoidance, does more to communicate danger than 1,000 overt scenes ever could. It places the viewer in the same position as Mike, aware, helpless, listening from the next room. Light is another critical element. The film bathes in soft natural light during the day, creating a dreamlike atmosphere. But that light is never overly romantic. It's filtered through dust, through half-drawn curtains, through tree branches that dance in the wind. It gives the entire film a feeling of memory, familiar but unreachable. At night, shadows deepen. Warm tones shift to colder blues and grays. The house feels smaller. The silence louder. The most emotionally powerful visual element, though, is flight. When Bobby's wagon finally launches from the ramp, it's not filmed with bombast. There's no triumphant music cue. No dramatic zooms. Just a slow, steady rise. The wings tilt. The light glints. The world falls away. And for a few seconds, the impossible becomes visible. Not in a way that demands belief, but in a way that invites it. The sound design mirrors this restraint. Wind. Footsteps. The creak of old floorboards. The hum of a streetlight. Dialogue is often sparse. What's said carries weight because of the silence around it. Music drifts in gently, often from diegetic sources, radios, record players. The score is used sparingly. When it does appear, it amplifies the emotional undercurrent rather than leading it. And in the final moments, as the wagon disappears beyond the trees, the sound drops away entirely. Just wind. Breath. A fading heartbeat of memory. Symbolism is stitched through the settings. The hill as a portal. The wagon as transformation. The hallway as fear. The garage as hope. Even the sky itself becomes a character. Wide, open, waiting. It appears again and again, framed through windows, reflected in puddles, glimpsed from behind fences. Always just out of reach. Until the very end. That's when the sky finally opens. When the camera lifts. When the boy lifts. When everything below becomes small. And what once felt like escape suddenly feels like home. Because that's what the setting is in this film. Not just a place. Not just a time. But a home. Not the one we live in. But the one we carry. The one we remember. The one we believe in. Even when it hurts. Even when it's gone. Especially then. Sometimes, the most memorable stories never make it into the final cut. They unfold quietly on the other side of the camera, in glances exchanged between scenes, in unexpected disasters turned into triumphs, in the strange rhythm of real life leaking into fiction. The making of this film was no exception. What played out on screen may have been the story of two brothers, a red wagon, and a childhood teetering on the edge of fantasy and fear, but behind the scenes, a very different kind of magic was being built. And like all good magic, it didn't come easy. The production began under uncertain skies. Literally, the first few weeks of shooting were plagued by unpredictable weather. The crew had chosen a sleepy California neighborhood that resembled Middle America in the late 60s. Modest homes, wide sidewalks, an endless stretch of blue above it. But instead of golden sunshine, they got clouds. Unseasonal rain. Light that never quite behaved. At first, there was panic. Lighting setups were overhauled. Schedules rewritten. But then the cinematographer leaned into it. Those clouds, he said, made everything feel softer, older, like the film was happening inside a memory. From that point on, overcast skies became part of the plan. Then came the challenge of the red wagon. It was more than a prop, it was a character. And that character needed to fly. The special effects team built 6 different versions. One was lightweight for the boys to pull. One had a hidden motor for controlled movement. One had collapsible wings. And one, rarely used, was designed for a wire rig that could simulate flight. But the wagon never cooperated. It squeaked at the wrong time. Wobbled when it needed to glide. During one test shoot on the ramp, a wing detached mid-run and flew into the bushes. The crew called it the bird, and from that point on, any mishap on set was blamed on the wandering wing. But the mishaps weren't always technical. One afternoon, during a quiet scene where Bobby sketches his escape plans, the lights cut out. Not just on set, but across the block. A city transformer had failed. Production halted. The cast and crew sat around for hours, unsure when they'd be back up. That's when Joseph Mazzello, the young actor playing Bobby, pulled out a deck of cards and began performing magic tricks. Elijah Wood joined in. Elijah Wood joined in. Soon, a full-blown magic show was underway, complete with fake stage names and improvised costumes. The assistant director filmed it on a camcorder. That tape still exists somewhere, a low-resolution treasure from a power outage-turned-theater. Their friendship became the beating heart of the set. Elijah and Joseph weren't just acting, they were bonding, truly, deeply. They spent lunch breaks lying on the hill, staring at the sky, inventing constellations. They built paper airplanes and raced them across the soundstage. They even shared a journal where they'd write notes to each other in character. "If we had to live in the wagon," one entry read, "I'd let you have the front seat." That journal was never meant to be part of the film, but it informed every moment of their on-screen chemistry. And then there was Shane, the dog with a soul older than the story. Shane wasn't just a good boy, he was a scene stealer. Originally cast as a trained animal actor with dozens of credits, Shane's first day on set went terribly. He refused to hit his marks. Barked at the boom mic, ran off set mid-scene to chase a butterfly. The trainer was mortified. But the director watched quietly. Then smiled. "Let him do what he wants," he said. "He's not a movie dog. He's their dog." From that moment on, Shane wasn't directed. He was followed. Cameras captured him lying at Bobby's feet, nudging Mike's hand, chasing shadows with the kind of randomness only a real dog could. His unscripted loyalty became one of the film's emotional anchors. When Bobby disappears and Shane waits by the hill for days, tail still, ears alert, that wasn't a trick. That was Shane waiting for his friend. There were other surprises, too. One day, the production team discovered that the neighborhood kids had started sneaking onto set at night. Not to steal or vandalize, but to play. They were drawn to the props, the costumes, the hill. They left behind chalk drawings on the pavement. Toy soldiers in perfect formation. Notes written in crayon asking if Bobby was real. Rather than chase them off, the crew embraced it. Those children were invited to appear as extras in a background scene, laughing and biking past as Mike and Bobby walked by. They were never told what the movie was about. Just that it was about kids who could fly. Even the adults felt the pull of something special. Richard Donner, the director, was known for commanding big sets. But on this film, he took a softer approach. He didn't use a loudspeaker. He used his voice. Always calm. Always steady. On difficult days, he'd bring the boys donuts and sit with them while they ate. Not as a director. As a listener. And when it came time to film Bobby's final flight, Donner asked the entire crew to remain silent, not just for sound, but out of respect. No one spoke. No one moved. And when the wagon lifted, even the wind seemed to hush. But not everything could be controlled. Filming the climactic hill sequence stretched into late hours. They needed just the right golden light, the right wind, the right silence. But nature wouldn't cooperate. Days of fog. Then wind too strong. Then clouds. The crew waited. Tension grew. But on the seventh day, yes, the seventh, the sky cleared. The sun dipped low. The air turned still. They got the shot. Bobby flew. Afterward, the boys didn't speak. They just hugged. Everyone on set cried. There was something else, too, something no one expected. A note found inside the red wagon. No one admitted to writing it. It wasn't part of the script. It wasn't planted by props. It was discovered by Elijah during a quiet moment between takes. Folded neatly, tucked under the seat. It read, "If you believe hard enough, you'll find your wings." No one ever found out who wrote it. But everyone swore they didn't put it there. And somehow, that made it even better. Post-production came quietly. The narration, voiced by an actor who preferred not to be credited, was recorded late at night in a studio lit only by a desk lamp. The director asked him to read the script like he was talking to his own child. Not like a story. Like a memory. And that tone, gentle, bittersweet, unsure, was the final piece. When the film was complete, a private screening was held for cast and crew. No red carpet. No press. Just folding chairs, popcorn, and a screen in a rented hall. At the end, there was silence. Then applause. But not loud. Just enough. The kind you give to something that doesn't feel like a movie anymore. Something that feels like part of you. In the years since, everyone involved has spoken about the experience not as a job, but as a chapter in their own lives. Elijah once said it was the first time he truly understood storytelling, not as performance, but as vulnerability. Joseph, years later, admitted he didn't realize how deeply the role had affected him until he watched it as an adult. One crew member described the shoot as the softest heartbreak I ever walked through. And maybe that's what the story was always meant to be. Not just about flight, but about the quiet miracle of people coming together to build something fragile and true. Something that still echoes, years later. In a red wagon gathering dust. In a dog that waited by the hill. In a note no one wrote. And in the hearts of everyone who dared, for just a moment, to believe. It begins not with a grand gesture, but with a whisper. a soft voice reflecting on a childhood that feels more like a dream than a recollection. There's something ghostly in the way the story is told, like a photograph slowly being developed in the darkroom of memory, shadows forming before the faces. From the first frame, it's clear this isn't just a story about two boys and a wagon. It's about what that wagon means. About what belief becomes when reality is too painful to bear. It's about what happens when the only way out is up at its core. The film is built around one devastating, beautiful idea: imagination as salvation. Not imagination as play, not the kind you find in costumes or fairy tales, but imagination born from desperation. When the world becomes unlivable, the mind reaches out for something else. Something softer. Something higher. Bobby doesn't imagine the wagon can fly because he's whimsical. He imagines it because he must. Because if it can't, then he's trapped. And for a child living in the shadow of silent violence, fantasy isn't just escape. It's survival. Every blueprint, every bolt, every sketch under flashlight is an act of resistance. An act of belief so radical that it becomes sacred. The film leans heavily into this theme, not through overt explanation, but through the quiet choices that shape each scene. The way Bobby talks about the wagon is with the seriousness of a scientist, the reverence of a priest. He isn't building a toy. He's building a lifeline. And Mike, older, more grounded, sees it too. Not at first. But slowly. Quietly. He starts helping not because he believes in flight, but because he believes in his brother. That's where the next theme comes in, just as vital: love as witness. Mike isn't a hero in the traditional sense. He doesn't stop the king. He doesn't rescue Bobby. He doesn't shout or fight or intervene in a way we're used to seeing in stories of abuse. What he does is harder. He sees. He remembers. He carries Bobby's story through time, into adulthood, into narration. He tells it, even when he isn't sure what parts were real and what were imagined. And in doing so, he does something revolutionary. He refuses to let Bobby vanish. He carries Bobby's story through time, into adulthood, into narration. He tells it, even when he isn't sure what parts were real and what were imagined. And in doing so, he does something revolutionary. He refuses to let Bobby vanish. That's the quiet heartbeat of the film. Love that doesn't save. Love that simply holds. The entire structure of the movie echoes that kind of love. It's not chronological. It meanders like memory. The narration isn't omniscient. It's uncertain, flawed, full of pauses. There's something sacred in the way adult Mike speaks. Not with clarity, but with tenderness. As if he's still trying to get it right. As if telling the story is his last gift to Bobby. And in that telling, another theme emerges: the blurring of fantasy and reality. This isn't just a stylistic choice, it's the emotional scaffolding of the entire film. Every scene seems dipped in amber. The lighting is soft, golden, like the last hour before sunset. Details shimmer. Edges blur. It's not realism. It's emotional truth. The kind you feel when remembering something that mattered deeply, painfully, beautifully. The kind you don't want to look at too directly, because if you do, it might disappear. Bobby's flight is the ultimate expression of this theme. The question of whether he truly flies is never answered. The film doesn't confirm, doesn't deny. It simply shows. The ramp. The wings. The wind. Then silence. The story lets you choose. For some, that flight is literal. A boy who built a machine and escaped a life that was slowly killing him. For others, it's metaphor. A child who died trying to run. Or perhaps something even harder to name, a myth built by Mike to cope with the unbearable. But the brilliance of the film lies in this ambiguity. Because in refusing to tell us what happened, it tells us why it happened. The wagon itself becomes a symbol so layered it shifts meaning from scene to scene. At first, it's a gift. A simple red toy. Shiny. New. It stands for possibility. A chance at normalcy. A childhood not yet tainted. But as the story unfolds, it transforms. When Bobby begins modifying it, adding wings, gear, sketches pinned to the garage wall, the wagon becomes a symbol of defiance. Of a child reclaiming control in the only way he can. By the end, it's something sacred. A vessel of hope. A machine of dreams. A handmade miracle. And even after it's gone, after Bobby is gone, it remains. In Mike's memory. In the voiceover. In the final shots of the sky. The wagon is never just a prop. It's the embodiment of belief against all odds. Another subtle but powerful symbol throughout the film is the hill. It appears early, in the background. A steep, grassy slope behind the boys' house. At first, it's just scenery. But as the film progresses, the hill becomes a destination. A dream. A test. It represents everything Bobby is trying to rise above. Every scene that takes place near the hill carries a weight to it. It looms. It waits. And when Bobby finally rolls his wagon to the top, it becomes sacred ground. The way the hill is filmed changes depending on the scene. Sometimes it's small, manageable. Other times, it feels impossibly large, like a mountain. That fluctuation reflects the boy's emotional state. Fear makes the hill taller. Hope makes it smaller. And when Bobby flies, the camera lifts for the first time, rising above the hill, giving us the sky we've been aching for. Silence plays a symbolic role, too. In most films, silence is tension. Here, it's truth. The moments where Bobby doesn't speak, where Mike just watches, where a door closes and the sound fades, those are the most powerful. Because silence is how children learn to survive trauma. They don't confront. They don't name. They endure. And the film respects that. It doesn't break the silence with exposition. It lets the quiet speak. The king, the abuser, is never named. Rarely shown. Barely speaks. This, too, is symbolic. He isn't a character. He's a force. A shadow. He represents something systemic, something insidious, abuse that hides in plain sight, that lives in the margins of normal homes. By not giving him a name, the film avoids reducing him to a single villain. It makes him an echo of every silence that's gone unchallenged. And the mother, tired, trying, failing, represents another hard truth, that love is not always enough. That sometimes the people meant to protect you are too lost themselves. Her kitchen, always just a little too bright, always filled with clatter and rush, becomes a symbol of distraction, of denial, of good intentions that fall short. But despite all this weight, the film is not cynical, because it holds one more theme, tucked deep beneath the pain, belief as inheritance. Mike, as an adult, tells the story to his own son. Not to explain. Not to mourn. But to share. That act is everything. He isn't trying to make sense of the past. He's trying to honor it. To pass down something more valuable than answers, a memory of belief. A belief that maybe, just maybe, his brother flew. And that's the thread that ties everything together. Not whether Bobby lived or died. Not whether the wagon flew. But that belief itself has power. That storytelling is how we keep people alive. That love, even when it can't save someone, can still carry them forward. The cinematography supports this with incredible restraint. Scenes are often framed through doorways, through windows, through fences, creating the sense of watching from a distance. The color palette shifts between dusty browns and soft yellows, never quite vibrant, never quite gray. It's a palette of memory, of stories held just slightly out of reach. The lighting feels like a sunset that never ends. Even the music serves the themes. The score doesn't overwhelm. It supports. It arrives like breath, like warmth under a blanket. And in the final scene, when the music swells and the wagon lifts, it doesn't feel triumphant, it feels necessary. Like a prayer finally answered. There are smaller symbols, too. The dog, Shane, who waits faithfully at the hill, even after Bobby is gone. He represents loyalty. The kind that doesn't ask for proof. Just presence. And the sketches Bobby draws, childlike, full of arrows and hopeful notes, are more than plans. They're expressions of belief, made real on paper. Like a child trying to map his way out of heartbreak. Ultimately, the film's most profound theme is this: truth doesn't always live in facts. Sometimes it lives in what we choose to believe. Bobby's story is not wrapped up in a bow. We don't get a headline. We don't get closure. What we get is a memory, filtered through love and time, retold by someone who never stopped carrying it. A boy who once watched his brother build wings. A man who now tells his son about that summer. Not because it's simple, but because it's sacred. And in the end, the film gives us a choice. To believe or not. To decide if flight is real.